Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Mickey DeVise, and I'm a reference librarian at the Cincinnati History Library and Archives, part of the Cincinnati Museum Center. We were formerly known as the Cincinnati Historical Society, founded in 1831, but some of the materials in our collection are far older than that and predate the founding of Cincinnati in 1788. Here you see Aaron Burr, assembling his troops for the invasion of the West. Now, one day our library manager, Jill Bice, was reading the Western Spy, one of the earliest Cincinnati newspapers. These old papers were much larger than today's, maybe 2.5 by 3 feet, and 6 months to a year's worth of issues are bound together in one volume. So she's reading this giant paper, and I say to her, "Can't you just read the Enquirer like everybody else?" And she said, "You have to see this. It's the article in the paper from 1804 where Aaron Burr mortally wounded Alexander Hamilton in a duel." So here's that article. It's hard to read, I know, but it's 216 years old. I literally cut and taped a photocopy together. Now, you don't see my tape there. That was on the book already. And in the original, the first line of the article, you see it on the right-hand side, about an inch from the top, was at the bottom of the page, and part of it's cut off. And then the next part of the article begins at the top, and I think it's just really hard to read, but trust me. We have a large number of original local newspapers in our collection, including the first newspaper in Cincinnati, the Sentinel of the Northwest Territory. If you're not familiar with the musical Hamilton, it was written by Lin-Manuel Miranda and tells the story of the duel between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. Miranda began his career as an English teacher, but was writing music, plays, and musicals while still in college. On vacation in 2008, he read Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton and began writing songs based on Hamilton's life, which evolved into this extremely popular, clever, amusing musical. I don't mean to sound like a commercial, but if you hadn't seen it yet, the original cast was recorded in a performance that will be released as a movie this July, and I suggest listening to the music first to catch up on the story. Mr. Miranda has done for history what J.K. Rowling did for children's literature with the Harry Potter series, and that is made it cool, interesting, got everyone talking about it. Someone said to me, "I don't want to watch a bunch of people singing about politics in their underwear," and I thought, well, I do. Miranda won the Pulitzer Prize for drama for Hamilton, and we are all big Hamilton fans in our library. Now, here is another document those familiar with the musical might recognize. Hamilton wrote a 52-page letter complaining about President John Adams. It's a lot funnier in the musical than the actual document. So after I read the article Jill showed me, I said, we have to tell the Hamilton story with materials in our collection. And then our wise librarian, Ann Shepard, who's been with the library for 55 years, said, "No, you need to tell the story of the Burr Conspiracy," which honestly I was not familiar with. It's somewhat complicated. I'm going to summarize it here, but I'm not going to go into too much depth about it. There are whole libraries full of Burr Conspiracy material, including our own, and we can certainly direct you to further reading. But I want to focus on the Cincinnati connections to Burr. I'm going to give a little background first. So slide 4 is, there's the Hamilton duel, Burr. I think Hamilton did throw away a shot, even though all through the musical he said he was not going to do that. And so he was killed by Burr, who faced charges of murder, lost his position as vice president of the United States, and fled New York. The murder charges were later dropped. But the following year, or maybe even beginning that year, details are a little murky. I guess because when you're plotting a revolution and takeover, you don't really, document it for the public to be aware of. So he plotted this revolution in the West to take the Ohio and Mississippi valleys and form them into a separate republic. Failing that, he wanted to invade and colonize the Spanish territories of Mexico and Texas, with New Orleans as the capital, and establish an empire of the West based on the Napoleonic model. Now, either of these acts would have been treason. Spoiler alert, though Burr was tried for treason in the most spectacular trial in the United States thus far, he was acquitted of all charges. We have many volumes on the trial, also pamphlets, speeches, broadside, ephemera, and other related material. So, Burr was a complex character, the most dubious of the founding fathers. He had a wide circle of friends, but a wider circle of enemies. He believed women were the intellectual equal of men, but was a notorious womanizer. He was strangely unmoved by the death of his longtime friend Hamilton, by his own hand yet, but the story of hungry orphans could bring him to tears. Later in life, he adopted 2 sons. They were reputed to be his own biological offspring from time spent abroad. Much later in life, when Burr's second wife discovered her dwindling bank accounts were due to Burr's bad land speculations, she chose the son of Alexander Hamilton as her divorce lawyer. There are Burr family descendant groups and Burr fan clubs even today who claim that he was misunderstood and wrongly accused. One of my favorite descriptions of him is from Colonel James Taylor, the founder of Newport, Kentucky, who remembered Burr from his October 1806 visit to Cincinnati as very agreeable and one of the most extraordinary men I have ever seen. A small, light-made man of about 5 feet 7 or 8 inches, dark blue eyes, the highest forehead I ever saw, remarkably neat in his dress and person, and his eyes more like a rattlesnake than human being. So back to the conspiracy. I will mention 3 non-Cincinnatians that played a large role in aiding Burr. Here are images of Harmon Blennerhassett and his niece, wife, okay, both. He married his niece, and the speculation is that they left Ireland because of the scandal over that marriage. Blennerhassett was a lawyer and fabulously wealthy, at least until he met Burr. Below you see an image of their mansion on Blennerhassett Island in the Ohio River, not far from Marietta. It's 146 acres, which he bought from George Washington. Who knew? Charming, smooth-talking Burr convinced Blennerhassett to invest money in his scheme and provide a staging ground for the boats and supplies of the armada Burr was creating. It did not end well for the Blennerhassetts. They lost their home, money, and possessions and died in poverty. And I believe the militia took over their home once they were in disgrace, and it burned to the ground in 1811, but they've rebuilt it since then. And someone I know was out there last year, and she said they never said one word about the Burr Conspiracy in conjunction with Blennerhassett Island. So I thought that was interesting. Now, Burr also approached General James Wilkinson for assistance with his plan. Both men had served as aides to then Colonel Benedict Arnold, if that tells you anything. In an odd coincidence, Wilkinson had replaced Alexander Hamilton as the 6th most senior member of the US military. Later that year, when the plan went awry and the general learned he was under suspicion of treason for the Burr Conspiracy, he sent a dispatch to President Jefferson in November 1806, informing him of Burr's treachery. And we have in our holdings many things related to Wilkinson, including a 3-volume set describing each of his 3 court-martial trials. Now here's just a little picture of Cincinnati in 1800. Cincinnati fit into Burr's scheme for a number of reasons. It was a starting off point for forays to the west, which was wide open at that time. And we have maps, and they just kind of end along the Ohio River. The Louisiana Purchase had just been made a few years later, and little was known about the land until they navigated it and charted it. the Ohio River was like a highway at the time, and it was a great place for Burr to stock up on supplies for his venture to Louisiana and the Mississippi River. And by the way, we have in our letter 3 collections from Meriwether Lewis written to Cincinnatians during the voyage of discovery. And that discovery was very exciting for our library when we realized the significance of those materials. Now, John Smith came along to Cincinnati in 1790. I couldn't find any image of him. He soon became minister of the Columbia Baptist congregation, you see on the left there, the church that they built 3 years after he got here. It's the first church in the Northwest Territory. Smith was also the business partner of James Finley, think Finley Market. Smith's reputation was so excellent that he was drawn into politics and became Ohio's first senator when Ohio gained statehood in 1803. That's where he met Burr, who as vice president was also president of the Senate body. Smith's attraction for Burr may have been his valuable connections locally, his knowledge of U.S. defenses along the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, and his role as a supplier and contractor for the U.S. Army. Burr, with all his charm and talent, may have convinced Smith that it was in his best interest to help sever the western states from the Union. Smith would have been able to acquire large amounts of provisions and military stores needed for a large-scale private expedition like Burr's without raising suspicion. Burr came to Cincinnati in May of 1806 and stayed at Smith's home, also seen here, his new home in Terrace Park. Now, Burr's reason for legitimate reason, or what's the word I want? The reason he said he came to Ohio was the discussion of building a canal around the Falls of Ohio. This was a series of rapids between Clarksville, Indiana, and Louisville, Kentucky. Goods being shipped downriver had to be unloaded from the boats, transported by land to below the falls, and then reloaded on the boats. A canal would have solved that problem and ingratiated Burr to the people of the West, where the reaction to the duel was not so strong. Things like that were more common and accepted out here. He talked to Smith a great deal about the problem Jefferson was having with Spain out west, tailoring the information to suit his own scheme, and with no one present realizing anything unpatriotic was in the works. Burr's plan never materialized, and like I said, he was caught, charged with treason, tried, and acquitted of the charges. Because of his association with Burr, Smith's reputation was tarnished, and his life ended in obscurity and poverty. We have the John Smith papers in our collection. Here's a sample. This is him writing to General Finley. You see the Finley's name down there at the bottom, reminding him of their friendship. We also have the only known copy of the Senate report of the committee appointed to inquire into the facts related to the conduct of John Smith, 1808. We also have the letters of John Smith's lawyer, William Prince. And I believe he hired at one point Francis Scott Key to represent him. Some of the trials took place in Virginia and Frankfort, Kentucky. And so there were lawyers and defendants all over the place. Here is a copy of a resolution to then Mayor David Ziegler, signed by many powerful people of Cincinnati in support of John Smith, also from our collection. Here's James Finley. He was a general in the militia and mayor and all kind of other stuff. Oh yeah, good looking guy there. And then this is a page, I'm sorry for the poor quality of this. It's a huge ledger book written in, I had to do it in two, it's not very well pasted together, but you can see the inventory of what the militia had. This is about 1796, but you can see James Finley's name right there by the seam. And it's one of my favorite things in the collection. Now, John Stites-Gano, whose account book this was, drafted a flotilla to try and detain Burr's armada, but they made it through before they could be stopped. Here's just a little document from Fort Massac on the Ohio River in Illinois. It also describes Burr's flotilla and that nothing untoward was going on with the group. And then I have, so Wilkinson spent a lot of money, ironically, as part of the conspiracy, but then he later filed to be reimbursed for the land he bought and the supplies he bought. So I find that a little ironic that he expected to be repaid for that. And honestly, I don't know if he ever was. But if I have a few more minutes, so we floated this idea before the program's chairperson, and we were given the go-ahead to hold an event related to the Burr Conspiracy by the Museum Center. We had a sellout crowd who all had a pretty good time, I think. We set up a table at the event with replicas of the documents and maps related to Hamilton and Burr, and we're able to speak with many guests about our library. And at the last minute, you know, because exhibit staff was really busy creating new exhibits and setting things up, but we were lucky enough to have our exhibit team set up a display case for us. And I knew in our collection we have James Finley's invitation to the 1825 ball in honor of the Marquis de Lafayette, and the presentation sword which Finley wore that night, both of which we requested to put on display for the event. Now, the Marquis de Lafayette figures prominently in the American Revolution and in the music of Hamilton. So the display case they brought was a 30-inch cube, and I was trying to do the math, and I actually had to have my son do it, trying to figure out how long an object could fit into a 30-inch cube. And later that afternoon, the registrar came to the library, and he had a great big card, and in it, he had just this tiny little box, and I thought, oh, darn, we didn't get the sword. Well, it turns out the sword was only 9 inches long, really more of a dagger. But I'm so glad we got to let people see it that night, because it was spectacular. Now so for the event, we had our costumed interpreters portray 4 Cincinnatians who were connected to the Burr Conspiracy, with John Smith as the main player. And I am not making this up. 2 days before the event, someone came into our library asking to see the John Smith papers. And I assumed it was one of the interpreters for the event, come to study the collection in more depth in the packets we had made for them. Much to my surprise, he was a relative of John Smith's. And of course, the first thing I said was, how do you know? Because a name like John Smith, you know, but all the facts were right. He was the first representative from the state of Ohio, and he was a minister of Columbia Baptist Church. And so this man was there to work on his genealogy, but I got them all set, and then I ran over to the History Museum staff, and I found the 4 people portraying the actors, portraying the people from Cincinnati during the Burr Conspiracy. And I brought them all over to meet the real Smith relative. Now, if you've ever seen the movie Night at the Museum, where the mannequins come to life and the PhD student gets to interview the topic of her dissertation, Sacagawea, it was kind of like that. So I thought it was great. So let's see here. Here's our library phone number, web address, and email address. There are good articles about Burr, Smith, and many other people, places, and events in Cincinnati history in the digital journals, which is the last link you see there. Thank you for having me today, and I appreciate your support of Cincinnati Museum Center. Oh, and I meant to say, if anybody had any comments, they could have added them all along.
Nice job, Mickey.
Thank you.
So Mickey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So you were mentioning Blennerhassett Island, and there's been a lot of archaeology done on Blennerhassett.
Really?
There's a big Fort Ancient site there and some other stuff, but also a lot of work has been done at the Blennerhassett House in the grounds, because it is a unique situation. It's one of the largest islands in the Ohio River. Yeah, it's a well-known, when you go east of here, most people know of Blennerhassett. So
yeah, and I guess they rebuilt the mansion to look just like the original. So
I haven't been there, so I don't know. But
I
I
haven't
know
either.
people who have worked there. The guy who does our remote sensing has worked there multiple times. So yeah.
I've always wanted to take a summer and just travel to Ohio and see all the Native American earthworks that are still existing. I think that would be a fantastic trip around the state. Yeah, I mean, the Blennerhassett's lost everything. And then Burr went on his merry way, and he left for Europe for a while and then came back. And although it was never quite the same for him, and he was in poverty and shame. So
to add to that, Mickey, I just found a pot that I'm working on at home that came from Blennerhassett Island. I'm trying to pull it up because I did it this morning. I put it into our database.
are you kidding me? A pot?
Yeah, it's a little bowl. Yeah, give me just a second. I'll find it.
Well, what a small world, isn't it?
There it is. I got to sort some stuff to pull him up just right, but I'll see if I can share him so you can see. Here it is. It's perforated on both sides. Let's see. Your screen.
What if I'll stop sharing so you can.
Oh,
Did it come up at all? I don't see anything on mine.
It's there. It's
Okay.
there.
Yeah, so it's this little jar. There's not a lot of information for it. It's part of the Thomas Clanney collection. What I really think is interesting are the two perforations that are opposite one another. And for a long time, I always thought that these perforations were for suspension. But Bob and I have a colleague whose name is Richard Zane Smith, and he's a wonderful Native American potter. And a lot of the vessels that he makes, he uses natural pieces of wood or roots as a handle, and he uses the perforations on the side as a way of lashing those to it. So I have a new appreciation, I guess, for vessels that I see that are perforated like this, because it's always been assumed, at least in my mind, that they've been for suspension rather than for attaching a handle, which a lot of them don't have that kind of like teapot handle on top.
Are you showing the description or the pot itself? I see the description.
Let me pull. I needed to know the collection number and where it was. So it's in cabinet.
Are our faces maybe up the side of your screen?
Yeah. So if you minimize your faces,
let me go right to its storage location in its file, and I'll pull up at 19610. Wait, C30-5. Where am I at? C30-5. What about now?
No, it's no different.
No different? Let me see if I can change. I have a million things open on my computer all at once, of course.
It's funny because, well, for the library book club, we just read The Pioneers by David McCullough.
That's a great book.
Yes. But, you know, it all starts with as if, you know, no one was there before the Euro-Americans got there, you know, and are there good histories of the United States before the Europeans came over? Or
what about now? Did I get it up this time?
yay!
Yeah.
Oh my
There it
God,
is.
it's beautiful.
I can't quite, it looks to me like, and it may not actually be from Blennerhassett Island, to be honest. That's what the collection records indicate. This particular pot, it seems to have a very faded, like reddish like slip on the exterior. And to be honest, with the Thomas Clanney collection, there's some collections management errors that were made in the early 1900s or late 1800s, but it's a unique form for this general area for sure.
Well, that's not a name that you're likely to mistake for something else.
That's true, but I've run into a lot of issues in this collection where I've seen pottery that obviously came from the lower Mississippi River Valley that claims to have been from like Big Bone Lake, Kentucky. So,
Well, could it be that the Native Americans carried them from place to place, and that's how they?
could be. It's not a common type of pottery at all in this area. It's almost a pinch pot, and the
It is
holes that are going
It is a
through it
pinch
are
pot. Yeah, that's a pinch pot.
they're punched through. They're not like drilled.
Yeah.
And blackened base from either the firing or exposure to heat at a later time. I
Oh,
wish
my-
I could decipher what it actually says on the side in this obvious old, like 19th century script, but not without having it in hand, and maybe not even
Oh,
then.
yeah. Well, Ann Shepard's pretty good at reading that old handwriting, so.
It seems pretty faded in a lot of places. I mean, here it is again running along this side, but looks like it says 1840 something, or 184, or maybe 1811.
Yeah. When you find something now, do you still write on it, or?
Most of the time we use tags for labeling information, and we also link a lot of the additional information about something to its collection record in KEEMU or in its file. We wouldn't write on an object like this other than just a catalog number, which typically would be on the base. We always put a catalog number in the most discreet spot possible. At least Bob and I do. I can't say the same for past volunteers or interns.
No, we have some things in the library, and it's really surprising when you see they would mark them up with pen and or write the date or something on it with
My favorite
pen.
is like stamping things all over letters from like 1800 and things.
And actually, looking at it more closely, it sure looks like it says Blennerhassett Island here. ISLAN, and then the D looks like it's missing or is kind of obscured in this darkened area.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, there's another connection between our collections. I love it. I love
Yep.
So Mickey, I mistook this title for the Burr Concerto. I thought you were going to sing.
it. The only
That's when you
singing
have to
was
have the Zoom happy hour, Bob. Then she sings.
It's not too late.
it's starting now because it's been a heck of a week, but yeah.
But great job.
Yeah,
Thank you
it was
so
great. I
much.
learned a lot. Thanks, Mickey.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your support. You two, you've been just amazing through all this. So
Oh, what can we say, you know?
You always support us by sending us great articles from your collection that we aren't always aware of. So keep sending them our
well, I
way.
always say I don't have to know anything. I just have to know where to find it. So
Yep.
well, we'll see you over Geyer soon, won't we, Joe?
Lee.
That
Yeah.
we will.
Okay.
Yay.
Take
Can't
care.
wait, guys. We'll see you guys.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.